welcome to the Feminist Buzzkills podcast, where we are going to be unpacking the biggest abortion news of the week. The fact that the Supreme Court actually had a unanimous abortion this week.
Wow.
Yes, that is correct. All 9 justices voted to protect mifepristone, and my dear co-host, who you just heard, Moji Alawodale, and I are going to be unpacking it with the amazing Chris Geidner. Moji, oh my goodness.
Liz, I am so excited to know that they aborted the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine's ridiculous case they just yeeted it. It's incredible. Such good news.
I mean, we've been talking about it since 2022. For those of you who are hearing about it for the first time, a group of crackpot anti-abortion doctors, say it with me, Moji, and
a dentist
filed a suit saying that they were personally harmed by medication abortion and wanted it yanked off the market. Their first stop on this wild journey was a hand-picked judge in Amarillo, Texas, who said, I agree, we should throw medication abortion out completely. In fact, we should use the Comstock Act to do it, because that old 1873 chestnut that says you can't mail anything morally objectionable through the mail, that includes birth control, let's throw the whole thing out, right? Then it went to the second most crackpotty court, the Fifth Circuit, and they said, that's a little nuts. But let's look at how they've expanded access. And you totally have standing with all of your hypotheticals that you might one day see a patient and give them abortion pills, even though you don't have to. And then what happens, Moji?
And then the Supreme Court said, I guess we got to weigh in on this, Okay, fine. We're going to just take it and we're going to talk and we're going to see what happens, because we aren't really sure what's going on with the abortion pill, but we got to be clear.
And they were really cool about, like, they asked the right questions. I mean, I remember us listening to that case and feeling like they did ask over and over again, like, how are you harmed again? Like, you have conscience clauses that are federally protected. And are you ever going to dispense this pill? Have you ever dispensed this pill? Have you even seen one of these pills? Can you identify a pill in a lineup? Like, they were like hitting it hard.
I mean, they really asked, they were like, okay, have any of your doctors, anyone, one, okay, one, not none. And the answer is none of them. Of all the doctors and a dentist that they had, no one actually knew how abortion pills worked, but yet they had the gall to make it to the Supreme Court.
And the one thing I want to point out before we bring our expert on is, through the course of this mifepristone case, a lot of the facts and research that this anti-abortion group of people brought forward was retracted for being false. 3 studies were retracted from where they were posted. And we wondered to ourselves earlier if SCOTUS actually looked into that or took notice of it. And a unanimous decision would indicate to me that possibly they looked at that shoddy research and said, you know what? Even us, who desperately wants to be able to give these people standing,
literally can't wait to give them standing.
Can't do it. It's too much, right? And so there's so many questions to figure out in this case. Like, in this ruling, was there something that would lead us to think, bum, 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 is coming?
And I want to know.
I want to know too.
I really want to know.
And that's why I'm glad we're going to be talking to Chris in a minute, because he can parse out some of the sort of statements that were made, and the fact that Brett Kavanaugh wrote the opinion for the majority.
Wow. I didn't even know he could write. So that's really exciting news.
I know. And he didn't mention the word beer once. And so, he wrote it, and it's actually just so surprising but it's not that they're all like, oh, we see the light of day and we now want to protect mifepristone. It's people who are so egregiously don't have no skin in the game brought this case forward. And I'm going to ask Chris this. I don't think they want to have set a precedent where crackpots can just file cases about anything they want and dump it on the Supreme Court to be like, I'm mad about this. I don't want to do this, so other people shouldn't.
They're barely moving fast enough with what they have. I actually, the more we think about it and look at it, I do wonder what the liberal justices have to say. Like, we only heard from conservative justices in both the decision and the concurrent opinion. But I do wonder, what was Ketanji Brown Jackson thinking about it?
I know there's no dissenting opinion. And that's really, that's been the first in abortion cases for us also. That's a new thing. Normally we're like, and what did it mean for the dissenting opinions? We didn't have to have one because everybody was like, this is hot. garbage, which is great. And the other thing, Moj, I was like, in the oral arguments when we listened, Scalia, and I can't remember the other justice.
Scalia?
Well, I mean, they're all Scalia to me. I'm sorry, Alito. They brought up the Comstock Act. And so we were like, oh my God. And Cass Merrick brought up the Comstock Act in the lower court ruling.
He loves it.
And Comstock Act was not mentioned at all in this as well. So I feel like that's a shame spiral.
It's also wild that Comstock was not mentioned at all. EMTALA was.
EMTALA was.
It's just a lot of interesting things in this decision that I didn't expect.
And that's another thing I think we should ask Chris about, is because they did mention EMTALA and did what they say give us a foreshadow to EMTALA. And also, I'm excited just to talk about Chris's feelings on Elizabeth Prelogar and how she just laid out the case so brilliantly to get a unanimous decision.
She's my second favorite beauty queen. Vanessa Williams is my first, and she's my second.
Well, I think that we've done enough postulating about setting up what's happening. I think it's time to get to our grand, delightful expert. What do you suppose?
Let's get to it.
Joining us is a friend of the pod who always comes in and helps us with difficult legal SCOTUS things. He's an award-winning journalist who covers the Supreme Court, law, and politics at Law Dork. For more than 2 decades in journalism, Chris Geidner has covered all things around LGBTQ issues, the criminal justice system, and other complex legal questions. Please welcome our friend Chris Geidner. Chris Geidner, thank you so much for joining us on this day of all days. We are unanimously concurring in this podcast that we cannot believe our ears.
I was going to say, you were not expecting to say that in your lifetime, maybe?
I would say for sure in my lifetime that there would not be a unanimous Supreme Court ruling that went the way of even sustaining current abortion access, which is Nutty McDougal. So as we talked about before you popped on, we kind of laid it out for folks. But what we just don't understand, Chris, is this seemed like such a clear case of people who had no skin in the game, no business bringing this case to the Supreme Court at all. So why the hell did any of these courts even take it, especially the Supreme Court?
I mean, this is the problem with the system that the current judicial crisis has created. It rots from the top down. And when you have a Supreme Court that has made it clear that precedent is this little dotted line that you do with what you want, what that has encouraged is lower court judges, first the appeals courts, and also district court judges to do things that in the past you just wouldn't have seen district court judges especially feeling free to do. Or if they did, you presumed there was this presumption of regularity that if you had a lunatic district court judge, that the appeals court would fix those things. But what we had here was the perfect example of how imperfect everything is right now, because you had a very, very extreme district court ruling from Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk that would have tossed out MIFEPRISTONE altogether, back from the 2000 approval, as well as the changes on limitations in 2016 and 21. That goes up to the Fifth Circuit, which did not say there's no standing, like the Supreme Court said today. They found standing. And then they said, okay, we'll look at these claims. The 2000 approval, we're going to toss that out. That's untimely. You're too late. You can't challenge that 20 years later. Duh. But even that duh was a little surprising that day. Like, we weren't sure they were going to do that. But they said, we do allow the 2016 and 21 challenges. You have standing, and we think you're right for various reasons that the FDA couldn't do those things. This is the thing. This was a situation where the FDA said, please, Supreme Court, take this. So the reason we had a Supreme Court decision today ultimately is because the Fifth Circuit forced their hand. If they hadn't, we would have had to have a ruling where the mifepristone was restricted back to its pre-2016 prescription requirements.
And I want to point out that that restriction would have been national. It wouldn't have just been in Texas. It would have been for all of us.
That was the other problem with this lawsuit, is that you had a sort of conflicting lawsuit out in Washington that had the Supreme Court rule differently today and allowed this case to go forward. We would have had questions because a bunch of more liberal states filed a lawsuit on the West Coast, basically trying to protect mifepristone access even further than the FDA's requirements. And so those could have eventually come into conflict had the Supreme Court not decided what it decided today.
We've talked about this case with you so much, Chris, and through every single piece that why did they take it? I had forgotten that both sides were mad about the Fifth Circuit ruling and both sides wanted the Supreme Court to hear it.
And Danco.
And Danco, the manufacturers.
Let's not understate the importance of this was a pro-business decision.
Yes.
At the end of the day, Justice Kavanaugh referred to these groups as pro-life. He really protected conscious protections, made clear that individual doctors can't be forced to carry out abortions. It was not solely a pro-abortion decision, although it does have that clear effect. It was also a decision that had this case been allowed, had there been standing in this sort of case, the entire drug approval process, not just for abortion drugs, would have been potentially thrown up in the air. And pharma was like, whoa, 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 buddy.
They could have put a lot of pharmaceutical companies out of business.
I mean, effectively out of business, because it could have just led to, this was actually, I hate to say it, but in parts a well-written decision by Kavanaugh, which is not something we often say. He talked about the fact that there's no doctor standing, that we don't have doctor standing, and that you're not allowed to just be like, I'm a doctor and I have questions about this rule, so give me standing, even though I don't carry out this procedure and am not directly affected by it. And that was the concern that pharma had, is are we going to have to worry every time we put a new drug on the market that some random person who's mad that the FDA made this decision is going to claim that they have standing to sue over it?
Well, Chris, also the one thing I wanted to ask you is, could it also be that take it out of the pharmaceutical conversation and add it to the any aggrieved crackpot conversation, right? Does the Supreme Court look, these people really don't have standing, but also if we rule that they do, anybody who was mad about a lawnmower or mad about a playground set or mad about something that they didn't have skin in the game could just start shelling the courts with class action cases.
There was a really interesting paragraph that goes outside the record, and Kavanaugh this is the sort of goes astray paragraph. He says about this doctor standing, if we invented a doctrine of doctor standing, there would be no principled way to cabin such a sweeping doctrinal change to doctors or other healthcare providers. He talks about firefighters and police and whether they'd be able to sue over building code changes, legalization of activities associated with increased crime. I think he was talking about marijuana legalization there. But then he has this sentence: teachers in border states could sue to challenge allegedly lax immigration policies that lead to overcrowded classrooms. I'm like, he sort of said a little too much there, but I get he was making a point. It was sort of how, even though it was in his framing and on sort of said a little bit too much about how he thinks about immigration issues, being a DC guy for his entire adult life. But at the end of the day, it sort of goes back to your opening question. It's how was this a case that we've had to deal with front and center for the past year and a half? When he puts it in those terms outside of this case, it sounds absolutely ridiculous that you'd even push forward with a case. And in some ways, like, I kind of like the fact that in a way you could say, like, he's saying, don't get any ideas, Kazmarek, don't do any of these things.
But we all know in Kazmarek's court
Anything happens.
right now, two crackpot professors from UT are suing. They want to be able to flunk students who've had abortions. So they took it from the UT Texas and went over to Lubbock into that court. I digress. Anyway, Moji.
I wondered because Kavanaugh wrote a lot, right? And it was a unanimous decision, but Clarence Thomas felt the need to come in there with his concurrence and specifically cite the rights that abortion doctors don't have as well.
There was that one sentence, and that was just like, I just want to like poke a little because I don't like the reality of this decision. But honestly, the concurrence wasn't about abortionists, as he put it. The concurrence was that this was a normal Thomas concurrence. This was, there's another area of a law that I'd like us to look at. And he was talking about associational standing, and that he questioned the entire basis for that and says, nobody challenges associational standing in this case, so it's not before us, but I wanted to write 9 pages about it. It's like his little Dear Diary, but this is what Clarence Thomas did when he was alone on the court, when he didn't have a majority. And I know this isn't like gonna make me popular in the world, but like, I don't mind this. This is what Clarence Thomas does. Like, and this is sort of my pushback when people are like, Clarence Thomas is stupid. Clarence Thomas was just like a carry-on of Scalia, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, his ideas are often lunacy, but like, he is thinking about things and he wants us to like totally rethink the law. And today, what he said is like, I'm not sure if associational standing should ever be allowed. He just said, like, it's not an issue in this case. We're able to toss this on other grounds. And I agree with everything that Kavanaugh wrote. But if the right case comes along, I would all be for us just getting rid of associational standing altogether, because the whole point of standing is that we are redressing individuals' harms, and an association suing on behalf of its members is not suing for itself.
So, Chris, when we talk about Clarence Thomas's sort of 9 pages of associational standing, is that or is that not the same as third party standing?
No, third party standing is this idea that like, I have a relationship with somebody else. I'm an individual. I have a relationship with another individual, and I am suing on their behalf because it's not easy for them to sue.
So that's like why abortion providers bring cases.
Yeah. And the pushback on that from the right is like, they're basically saying that they don't have a close enough relationship. They don't necessarily have the same interests. And it's sort of questionable arguments.
Yeah. And they get real mad about that. I remember in the June medical case, they got real mad about that. And it was like, don't have a close enough relationship. I'm like, if somebody's up in my junk and both people's intention is for me to be unpregnant, I feel like everyone's invested in the same things. That third party seems solid to me.
Well, and that was why third party standing was really weak here, because these are people suing over something that they don't want and are not prescribing. The third party is, if anything, they're suing for the opposite of what anybody who wants that is. So that's why the third party standing is sort of almost dismissed out of hand here, because it's so absurd.
So what is the other standing you're talking about? What is that?
Some of the cases where it was originally found was like the NAACP suing on behalf of its members. And the idea is that we are suing on behalf of our members. We can represent their interests. It was necessary to protect their interests because they have reasons to be fearful if they were the named plaintiff. I hate to say this, and I'm sure there are legitimate pushback and there are reasons why associational standing over time has been important. But like Thomas points out that originally it was also made clear that within that associational standing that the NAACP did have individual specific interests for the NAACP itself because, that is their whole mission. And so, like, if you have laws that are restricting their ability to fully participate in society, the NAACP as an organization is also going to be restricted from fully participating in society. But again, that is a side issue. Even Clarence Thomas admitted that was a side issue today because nobody challenged associational standing. That wasn't an issue. The case was tossed because these people just did not have standing, even if they were able to make an associational standing claim. They just don't have it.
So, Chris, I'm wondering, you've talked a little bit about like what's in the body of the text, and I think we are all, for the most part, celebrating this as a win for abortion access, for all of the rights that we hold dear. Are there things you noticed when you read the text that say like, but this is giving it open for anti-succumb and either ban mifepristone or use it to in some way restrict abortion access?
No, not really. I mean,
Wow.
there's one note in the opinion toward the very end where some people picked up that Justice Kavanaugh, he says, it is not clear that no one would have standing to challenge the FDA's relaxed regulation of mifepristone. And some people were like, oh, he's sort of leaving the door open to future challenges. But if you like read it in context, that like literally the next sentence is where he goes on to say, but even if no one would have standing, this court has long rejected that kind of if not us who argument as a basis for standing.
Yeah.
That was more a setup for him to say, like, argue that all you want, even if you argue that that's not a basis. He wasn't saying, we want to be clear that we're not tossing out any other challenges to this case. He was basically saying, even if there are no parties who could challenge this, that doesn't mean we have to find standing here. But I will point out that there are, and this is what we had talked about previously, there are those 3 AGs who tried to intervene, the Missouri, Idaho, and one other AG who had intervened in this case.
I think it was Kansas, Chris Kobach.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, that monster.
Now, they weren't as a party up at the Supreme Court because cert had already been granted. But in theory, they're a part of the case now down below. Adam Unikowski, who is extremely smart. He's been the pro bono lawyer for LGBTQ groups on several cases over the past now decade. I'm aging. He also has the Substack like Law Dork, Adam Unikowski. His is even more Law Dorky than mine. He has gone through the fact that if this case was tossed on standing, that means basically that the court never had standing to hear this case, because if there's no standing, there's no standing. There never was standing. And so as such, Kaczmarek should have never had standing to consider the AG's motion to intervene. So therefore, this case should just be gone, and they shouldn't have to now go through with that. And if that is how Kaczmarek treats it and or how the Fifth Circuit treats it on appeal, that would mean that if these AGs want to bring a suit to try to raise their alleged state interests, which again are similarly speculative like this, they would just need to file their own lawsuit.
Yeah, because I just want to say that these AGs, their shit is literally like taking from the anti-abortion playbook of they're destroying the water system because abortion pills are getting in the water of the state. Their speculative claims are from wackadoodle conspiracy theories that are next level overcrowding of their hospitals. And there's a little bit of overlap and tie-in. that is really wild. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted people to know, like,
Yeah, the closest is some, like, there could be some increased burdens on their medical systems, which in some cases could lead to the state needing to pay that because if these are uninsured people and blah, blah, blah. However, I would note that in some ways, because that's like one remove from that, like I do think some of the like no doctor standing, no generalized doctor standing applies even stronger to the states there because it's like doctor standing via AG. So I'm not sure that those cases, even on their merits, would have any more success than this case did on standing. But I also think it's important to note that assuming that law means anything, which we know that that's in question at any point, they should not be able to proceed in front of Kasmeric with these claims, and they should have to file a new lawsuit where they actually have interest in order to bring this case, which would mean they would have to start all over, which would take further time to even get any ruling, even if they could judge shop and find a good judge. So the bottom line is, for now, the Supreme Court made a very clear, unabashed statement that they think that this challenge is not legitimate.
they aborted the case.
I mean, I think, let's be honest, if they thought that these were legitimate claims, like, you can find standing when you want it. At the end of the day, standing it's a wishy-washy enough thing that you find one thread that you pull through that you decide is not speculative and you just hang your hat on that. You find a way through. And I think, like, maybe you would have had a difficulty finding 5, but the fact that nobody
Right.
wanted that here is a pretty strong statement that, like, this court does not want this challenge.
Try another way.
Right.
A whole other way.
This wasn't the EMTALA challenge. We still have questions about that. But I do want to note that there were 2 paragraphs in the discussion about conscience protections in this decision that talked about EMTALA, that talked about the Solicitor General's answers to questions in the EMTALA arguments, that did talk about the importance of conscience protections, that EMTALA does not override conscience protections. I don't know if that is controlling.
Should we look at that as good foreshadowing? Because I read it and I didn't feel scared.
Exactly. They did not say, which they could have. In this decision, we do not address any potential conflicts between conscience protections and EMTALA, which have been raised in other cases. We've seen things like that at other times, but they didn't. They said EMTALA is subservient to conscience protections.
But Elizabeth Preliger, who was the Solicitor General, argued that very point during EMTALA.
It was actually showed how incredible she is. Like I've written about that, others have written about this, but like, I don't know when I've last seen an opinion that literally is like, as the Solicitor General described, like keep in mind, there are few things more stressful for a lawyer to like stand up before the Supreme Court and like respond to random questions from 9 people who have very divergent viewpoints, all while keeping in your mind, in the back of your head, you're looking for 5 votes. How do you get a majority? What are the consequences of your answers for other cases? And yet, what we see in this opinion from Kavanaugh is multiple points where he's like, as the Solicitor General said, and we think she's correct, this point made by the Solicitor General, like, that's incredible advocacy. And it shows how remarkable she is at dealing with what is an extremely averse courts to her interests very often. And yet, not only did she get a unanimous ruling today, but she got the court just like eating out of her hand.
I just want to say that I appreciate that we're spending a little bit of time having an Elizabeth Prelogar fangirl moment because she's incredible.
Like, I think she's great. I everybody thinks she's great, but like there was something weird about seeing quotes from oral argument, not as a gotcha, not on a like you sometimes see like as counsel conceded at argument. Like this was not that. This was like any concerns that might have been raised were alleviated by the Solicitor General who solved all of the problems.
She was awesome.
I am much more hopeful about EMTALA coming out of this opinion than I was coming out of argument.
I think that's a good place to end it because that feels really encouraging, Chris. And, you brought up so many interesting points to think about with us. And I want people to go to Law Dork and read, your sort of take on what we heard. So thanks for joining us, and tell people where they can find you to hear more of your amazing thoughts and feelings and expertise on all things SCOTUS.
Yeah, I'm Chris Geidner everywhere. Geidner on Twitter, X, Blue Sky, Mastodon, Instagram, everything.
Costco card.
Costco card, yeah. And www.lawdork.com. Google away, find it. It's easy to find.
Subscribe, pay for it. Yes.
And then also I'm at Law Dork News on Twitter X, on Blue Sky, and on Instagram.
Awesome.
We've got more than 24 opinions still left, so don't worry. I will just be continuing full steam ahead.
We're so thankful for you. We really are. Thanks for coming on and being able to break the news with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
It's not often that you're going to have me talking to you where we're going to have like an unmitigated success day. So I do appreciate that I was given that. I don't like constantly being like the cis white guy coming on to tell you how the men of the Supreme Court have ruined your lives today.
Also, it's good for you to realize that Moji and I have the capacity to smile.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen this before.
This is true.
Chris Geidner, thank you. We'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Moji, I feel like after talking to Jess and Amani, and they were a little bit more tentative, I did feel a little bit more hopeful because Chris had a more positive take that he didn't feel like there was any holes in this particular case.
He really was standing in like, this is an absolutely watertight case for this, and we can put this whole puppy to bed.
Yeah.
He didn't say no one's coming for Miffy, but he did say this whole case, whole cloth, we could probably stop thinking about and redirect our energy to all the other things we're worried about.
I know. And you know what? Because I'm petty as fuck, I immediately went to the X machine.
The bad place.
Dead naming Twitter. Yeah, the bad place. Because I wanted to see how like Alliance for Defending Freedom, who were the lawyers who lost, what their response was. And they were big mad.
Of course they're big mad. They're just because they're stupid doesn't mean that they don't have feelings.
Yeah, so they wrote, SCOTUS's ruling on our case against the FDA will allow the FDA to continue to endanger women's health for now. While we're disappointed the court did not reach the merits of the FDA's unlawful actions, nothing in today's decision changes the fact that women and girls are being harmed by the FDA's recklessness. What? First of all, I just want to, if I might, just do a reminder to people that in the United States, in the year 2000, medication abortion was allowed to be on the market. Since then, over 5 million people have used medication abortion with 25 fatalities.
That are not directly, that are associated with, not necessarily direct outcomes of using mifepristone or any of the pills involved in medication abortion. I also want to say this statement, and remember when we were in the street in front of SCOTUS when the oral arguments were happening, and we talked about how you'd look at some of their signs and it was like, protect women. And we were very much like, whose side are you on? Like, yeah, protect women. And they're like, protect women and ban the abortion pill. It's like, well, that's not how you protect women. Okay. I don't know. I just feel like this is more of the confusion and misdirection that the Alliance Defending Freedom, which even with their name tries to throw at us, and it just sticks.
And also, when I was saying to Chris, like the wildness of what these attorney generals who enjoin themselves into this case, when they say they have skin in the game, and I said, they're going to say that there's environmental harms to their state. Students for Life literally put on X that disappointing but not surprising, and notes that the case against chemical abortion pills will continue, and hopefully with an environmental focus. That is what they're going to be pushing. And it is wild when you hear them say that medication abortion is in the water and there's, uterine tissue and fetal remains in our water. I'm like, I don't know where you're drinking your water, but stop drinking out of the toilet.
They don't understand how water treatment works. Also, if we're concerned about pills in our water system, why just the one? There's Viagra also in larger amounts. Like, what drugs are you not concerned about? It seems like you're just concerned about this one drug and not the.
How about poop? There's poop in the water.
What are they doing about lead?
All I'm saying is that there's poop in the water. Take out drugs out of the equation. There is poop in your toilet as well. And we have something called a sewage system that seems to work wonders, unless you live in Flint, Michigan. And that's not what you're talking about. And you never have raised one eyebrow or protest sign about how we're destroying the community of Flint. I digress.
Exactly.
Anyway, enough snark. I think we should wrap up. But I think what we should do, Moji, is close out this fantastic segment with telling people what this ruling means for them.
This means that for all of us people in the United States, it means that we have access to mifepristone and the drugs in the abortion regimen. And even if you live in a state that has made some ridiculous law about it, organizations like Aid Access and others will help you get pills if you need them, and will mail them, because it is legal in this country to mail abortion pills any fucking where.
In all 50 states. So what that means is access to medication abortion is available up to 10 weeks of pregnancy. You do not have to see a doctor. You can do it through telemedicine. You can do it by phone, and you can access it through, as Moji said, Plan C Pills, Aid Access, and a lot of other organizations. We'll put some of those organizations in our show notes. So for now, the access to medication abortion that we had yesterday is the same and will be until further notice. Amazing.
Woohoo!
I know, woohoo is right. And you know what? The Supreme Court protecting mifepristone was this week's biggest news, but there was also a big steaming news dump of other important things you need to know. Moji.
And it's extra steamy because we kick off this week in Arizona. Oscar winner and national treasure Jodie Foster headlined a rally in Phoenix where thousands of activists gathered in support of the Arizona Abortion Ballot Initiative and to hand out over $500,000 worth of contraceptives and feminine hygiene products. Foster will continue her advocacy in Florida, where she will train patients to make the 70-mile swim from Miami to Cuba to access their abortions.
And we're going to stay in Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis continues to do what he does best, fail. Recently, old Puddin' Fingers created a freedom fund against both of the wildly popular abortion and weed initiatives on the Florida ballot this November. This week, we learned that at the end of May, there had still been 0 donations, showing us that there aren't enough bath salts in the entire state to make dropping cashola into his freedom to have no freedom money pit make sense.
And finally, Southern Baptists have voted that what's in your freezer has more rights than you. Yep, following Alabama's lead, claiming that IVF eggs should be able to buy a gun and vote, the 11,000 delegates at the Southern Baptist Convention agreed, voting that flopsicles are people, and will recommend that member churches denounce the practice to their 13 million members. We await next week's vote on opposing gay fertilized eggs and the practice of gender-affirming IVF. Wait, gender-affirming IVF?
Gender-affirming IVF. And this has been your steaming news dump. As always, the links to all these stories will be in the show notes, and you can find the best and most up-to-the-minute resources on accessing abortion care and funding your care on our website at aafront.org. Our Charlie chatbot is on the bottom right corner and will walk anyone anywhere in the country through their options and resources for abortion.
Liz, that's our show.
It was an exciting one, full of joy.
It was an exciting one. Yes, full of joy for once. Thank you for listening. And thank you to Chris Geidner. You can find his work at lawdork.com. And that's where you can get all his information about the Supreme Court and what's going on and legal interpretation of the cases we care about.
That's right. Did we make you smarter today? Make you laugh today? Show us some love by liking, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating. Plus, stay connected with us on social media at Abortion Front across all platforms.
With your help, we can get more people to learn about this assault on abortion access. Despite today's good news, the threat of mifepristone is still out there. One thing you can do now is demand our legislators repeal the Comstock Act, a long-forgotten 1800s relic revived as a dangerous weapon to halt the distribution of birth control and abortion information nationwide. We must act now. Visit aafront.org/Comstock Act and sign our petition today.
Looking for where you might fit in to do some abortion activism? We've got a 5-part training series called Operation Save Abortion at operationsaveabortion.com. While you're there, visit our super cool activist calendar, which is full of local and national actions and educational opportunities. On June 17th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern, Repro Action is hosting a virtual webinar on later abortion. They will dig into the reasons people may need abortion care later in pregnancy, how difficult it can be to access one, and what needs to change. It's open to all, and the link can be found in our activist calendar and in our show notes. We're also dark next week, of course, unless the EMTALA ruling comes down, and then we will be right back here with the amazing Stephanie Toti, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Lawyering Project.
Join our Patreon. You'll support great content and get cool FBK merch and experiences. All pledges support this pod and all of our activism at Abortion Access Front. Pledge at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills. FBK is edited by Remy DeTournay and is produced by Abortion Access Front.
And finally, we leave you with Christian hate-hole Pastor Joe Webbin, a man showing his whole ass with some heinously bad takes on women's suffrage.
You won't let women vote? Well, our society doesn't let 5-year-olds vote yet. I pray that it, that it stays that way. But we don't let children. Yes. We don't let children vote, and it's not just because of competency, because that would be the immediate counter as well. But their brain isn't fully developed, and so are you saying that a woman is like a child? Yes. But not intellectually. I'm not saying that. The question is how. In what way is a woman like a child? She is like a child in the way that God has appointed men to protect them.
Feminist Buzzkills, the podcast from Abortion Access Front. New episodes drop Friday. When BS is poppin', we pop off. And if you want to support our podcast and all the work of Abortion Access Front, like, subscribe, and join our Patreon at patreon.com/feministbuzzkills.
I'm Allison Gill, that's AG from Mueller, She Wrote in the Daily Beans, the premier podcaster for all things special counsel.
And I'm Andrew McCabe, former acting director of the FBI and unlucky guy who was right in the middle of getting Robert Mueller appointed special counsel in 2017.
And we're joining forces to document the investigations of Trump by the newly appointed special counsel Jack Smith as it happens.
Whether it's analyzing court filings, letters, indictments, or prosecution and defense strategies,
or asking questions about special counsel regulations, rules governing classified documents at trial, or the scope of the probes.
We'll be here first thing Sunday mornings to cover the latest breaking special counsel news and answer your questions with the assistance of some of the best experts out there.
So follow, rate, and subscribe to Jack wherever you get your podcasts, your only source for all things special counsel.